That's why you felt sorry for a little stray and decided to take me home. What an idiot. Look what an annoying mess you've gotten us into.
Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Anarchy, your favorite artistic little hell spawn. I'm sorry I've been gone for a bit. I wanted to have this video up way sooner, and if you've seen my community post, you'd know that I was hitting roadblock after roadblock to the point where the story I was originally going to do for this video needed to be absolutely and completely redone. And I knew I wouldn't be able to get all that work done in a timely manner to even get this out by the end of the month. So at this point, I was sick of working on it and I got really burnt out and I didn't even want to look at it. I didn't even want to look at these guys anymore. I was sick and tired. And it's actually because of that burnout that we have the video we are going to be getting into today. Because I, as a 19-year-old adult, have returned to an on and off hyperfixation that I've had since I was in the 6th grade. And my friends, that hyperfixation is SurVamp. The series that anytime I even mention it, my friends run away screaming because of the terrors I have inflicted on them. As I've mentioned, I got way back in the series when I was in like 6th grade, and I would yap and defend this series like it was the Bible. Like, I would genuinely not shut up, and my rose-colored glasses were so tinted that I think I was just straight up blind. Over time, though, those glasses became clearer and clearer, especially as I started to learn more about writing and proper consistency and things like that. But what really kind of shattered those glasses is that at some point, I don't really remember where, but you can kind of tell the creator was getting tired of working on the series. Like, it just had this random dip in quality. And after that, the series became more boring and I stopped following it. I feel like it was a situation that a lot of webcomics today on especially Webtoon go through, where a series really does not need to be as spanned out as it is, but they still try to push to make it as long as humanly possible. Currently, I have a very love-hate relationship with this series, and I'm actually confident in saying it's probably the worst in quality that I've talked about on my channel so far. But even with all of these problems, I have a weird emotional attachment to this series. I had a whole AU of it, it had OCX canon ships, and I've even tried to rewrite it several times over the years, but I always struggled and eventually gave up. Not because of the issue I have with my Miraculous rewrite, where I feel like my original ideas would work better as an original story, but mostly because, unlike Miraculous, SurVamp has very little foundation that I can work with. Everything down to the world building makes little to no sense and is really jumbled. But that didn't stop me from trying. You guys might remember a couple months ago if you're on my community posts. I keep mentioning my community posts a lot. Wow, I need to start posting in other places. Anyway, you might have noticed that I redesigned Kuro a couple months back as a warm-up, and recently, I think it's only like been 2 weeks, I redesigned the other character, Lily, as a stress reliever. And I also even rewrote his backstory. I think he had one, I just don't think it matched what he represented. I said at the bottom of that community post that I wouldn't make a video about SurVamp because I feel like it was too obscure, but you know what, frankly, I've been feeling like a lot of things on my channel is just me doing what's popular, and that's not me. I want to do things that I like for fun. This is my channel. I can do whatever I want. So this is still technically an OC video, it's just also a redesign. I need to stop saying things at the ends of my videos and then immediately taking them back. So in this reimagining slash blatantly original story, because I changed so much, there were a few concepts from the original story that I wanted to remain and keep clear. Number one being the main one, the concept of monsters making contracts with humans, and 2, the themes of family, autonomy, redemption, and morality. I'll be honest, I do not remember or really can tell if these are actual themes in the story that they were trying to go for, or if it's still the part of my brain that loves the story using headcanons to fill in the gaps. But you know what? Even if it's not there, it'll be in here. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. The first thing I want to address in this video is the setting. SurVamp, like most animes, takes place somewhere in Japan, but our story won't. Not because I don't like that aspect, but simply because I just don't really feel the need for it to. Our story will take place in the city of Echo Pines. It has a population of around 10,000 people, and it's known for its unusual history and eccentric residents. The original town that the city was built upon was destroyed a couple years back, but has since been remade to have a more modern feel. But it still has an eclectic mix of retro charm and supernatural oddities. Some old-fashioned shops and vintage diners still remain, and hidden occult influences are lurking beneath the shadows. And that's because the city is right on the edge to the spirit world. So there are several weak points to where parts of the spirit world can actually leak into the mortal realm. There's also an urban legend around the city, the knowledge that the city before it used to be occupied by a very major cult. The people outside of it, especially people looking for freedom and salvation, would often be lured there and never leave. The cult was ran by 5 prophets of a god by many names, and they were known as the Arch Prophets, and Nalthis was head of this cult, held as the prophet of the void. It's said that he would take people that come into the cult and turn them into monsters, trying to find the perfect vessel for the gods of the underworld. However, after an incident led to the death of the cult's leader, the cult disbanded, and the spirit realm was left in shambles, and the cult was left without leadership. They all fled to the shadows and have never been seen since. But it's still said that they lurk around, saying that their monsters are often the cause of various paranormal activity and even murders. It's why Echo Pines today is known as a paranormal hotspot, because with the gates to the spirit world wide open, anything can come through. Did you guys like my spooky, scary story voice? I put a lot of work. Moving on to the monsters that Nalthis would actually create, and these are the beings I made to technically replace servants, though I did remove the whole servant aspect of it, and while they're inspired by vampires, they technically aren't, so it felt wrong to call them that, so I've named them Wraiths. I'm gonna be real, I got that name after listening to Scylla in Epic the Musical like 11 times. And there will also be 2 other paranormal beings that we'll show in this story. Well, one isn't technically paranormal, but and that's witches and exorcists. Originally, I was gonna bring back the werewolves that Servamp initially introduced in one of the manga, but I'm gonna be real, Servamps in themselves are kind of weird creatures considering they turn into animals in the sun, so I felt like that was a little redundant, so I did witches instead. Now, there are different types and ranks of these beings, but I think it's best to focus on the basics for now, and I'll expand on the other types in other videos. Starting with the Wraiths themselves. Wraiths are essentially shadow demons. They are the result of dark ritualistic experiments by the cult known as the Arch Prophets that I just told you about. They take people who are on the brink of death and get them to consume the blood of creatures in the spirit and underworlds to create immortal beings, trying to create the perfect vessel for its gods. The type of wraith we're talking about today are currently known as the most successful experiment in these types of creatures. They're mostly humanoid with subtle monstrous traits like dark eyes with colored rings and sigils in them, and animalistic features based on the animal that was sacrificed in the ritual that made them. They don't have shadows, kind of like the shadows in Monster High 13 Wishes. Their fingers are dark and shadowy and end in claws like this, and they have a scar-like symbol somewhere on their body symbolizing how they died. Oh, and also a special shadowy aura with a color specific to them. Out of this species, there are 9 that are considered special because they are infused with the blood of the eldritch demons of the underworld. This includes entropy, sloth, pride, lust, envy, greed, wrath, gluttony, and deception. However, despite being the most successful, there is one major drawback that they and all wraiths struggle with, and that's their hunger. Wraiths feed on human blood and the souls to maintain control. Without feeding, they experience a type of withdrawal that progresses through 3 stages: heightened aggression, partial transformation to be more animalistic, and eventually a feral loss of humanity. I'm thinking they look a bit like witches in Madoka Magica. While originally they just fed on whoever, the Wraith of Entropy created the contract system and binded all of his siblings to it, and along with all of the other wraiths. So now, to manage their cravings, wraiths form pacts with humans called prophets, who act as a source of energy and a safety net. In exchange, prophets gained supernatural abilities, special favors, and protection. It was the best way he thought him and his family would be healthy while also not continuing to harm innocent people or cast judgment onto those they have no right to judge. As for their abilities, Wraiths rely on shadows from their own aura to use their powers. They have a signature weapon that glows their color, and it's made of shadows. They have their own unique set of abilities based on their concept, their animal, their death, and their personality. However, they all have abilities that they all share, such as being able to detect auras as a way to both sense each other, but also as a way to detect who is best to make a contract with, and shapeshifting into their creature forms to hide, recharge, heal, escape, etc. Onto the prophets though. Prophets are, as you may guess, a person that a wraith makes a contract with. When the contract is made, they'll get a symbol in the same place the wraith has their scar, representing the both of them as a team. While their own weapons, which I kept the name leads from the original for, are made of the same material as the wraith, being shadows, it has two forms, a special item that is unique to the prophet, and a weapon that they use to fight. Kinda like how in the original, Mahiru's broom turns into a spear. That was really dumb, by the way. He got that spear for absolutely no reason. Anyway, as for their powers though, their powers actually comes from their blood. Not only can a prophet's blood empower a wraith's abilities, but it gives them their own unique set of abilities. Just like a wraith, these abilities are unique to them, and it's based on their personal traits. But it also aligns with the reason they made the contract, and these unique traits can often affect the magic's form and potency. Oh, and your blood type affects it too. So if you have like really thin blood, you're not gonna be that strong. It's gonna take you more blood to like use spells and stuff. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. And since I am a real magical girly at heart, not only did I include a mechanic to where different parts of the spirit world will affect your outfits and abilities, I also added a mechanic that was inspired by Den. Wraiths can essentially become their prophet's shadow, giving them their power and giving them a new form with bits of both of their personalities. But this can also swap to where the prophet can become the shadow and the wraith can take full control. So there's technically two forms that they can share depending on who's in more control. I thought that would be fun. But there will be consistent traits like hair, eyes, extra parts, etc. It's like a armor. It enhances physical abilities and provides protection. You can actually also like compare it to fusions in Steven Universe. However, with everything comes limitations. Number one, each favor comes with a binding condition. After they form the blood oath, where breaking these terms can result in severe consequences such as curses, loss of one's abilities, or even soul forfeiture. And two, wraith influence. The more a shadow ability, specifically the fusing ability, is used, the stronger the wraith's influence over the soul becomes, potentially leading to complete loss or change of the soul. So it can't be used excessively without severe control. You kind of have to like have a rein on yourself. You have to train to be able to use this ability properly. With the wraiths and the prophets out of the way, I'm gonna move on to witches. Witches in this world are kind of a mix of traditional witches in folklore and ghosts, often made from covens of families who at a certain age after proving themselves are ascended to the gods above and brought back as divine beings of the stars, if they're chosen to, that is. They're meant to keep the balance of the various spirit worlds and the mortal realm, by any means necessary. Similarly to wraiths, they have a base concept they follow, and they're all connected to a different god or deity. They have ghostly translucent limbs, birthmarks on their faces, and hands that glow when they use magic, crystallized eyes and pupils, and ghostly hair that glows in the dark with little spectrals that fly off of it when they're using their powers, along with sigils on the back of their necks. They're mostly immortal and have heightened senses and agility. All witches have some type of familiar that's brought back with them, a physical manifestation of their soul, which means their life forces are tied together. Familiars act as guides, protectors, and kind of magical storage. Witches use their powers through their wands as conductors, but their actual power source comes from tarot cards, each card having various different uses and effects, and it's up to the witch to craft a deck that best suits them in the situations they're often in. This could be from healing spells to curses, though everything they do has an equal consequence, so they have to think wisely of how they use them. However, they can also use the cards to strategize, essentially using tarot cards for what tarot cards are meant to be used for, such as telling the future, communicating with deities, or the dead for assistance. They can also craft powerful potions, elixirs, poisons, using different ingredients for power boosts, but most witches don't do this. It's seen as kind of archaic. Witches live on a hierarchy, which I'll expand on in future videos, but this one mostly applies to common level witches. And just for fun, they also use their wands to travel like traditional broomsticks. And finally, we have exorcists. I promise it'll be short. Exorcists are kind of like the C3 of this story. They're groups of humans that were blessed by the heavens, or at least they believe they were blessed, to eradicate supernatural entities that defy natural laws to keep the world quote-unquote pure and safe. When recruited, they're subjected to strict physical conditioning, spiritual resilience, and arcane knowledge. This is so they can match the combat of the paranormal, resist possession, curses, and manipulation, and exploit weaknesses to vanquish this evil off of our godly, holy planet. They're given special weapons of light said to be blessed by God to vanquish these entities, along with items to capture them. I'm using air quotes like crazy because that's actually not where the magic from these weapons comes from, but that's a spoiler. Despite their hatred of the paranormal, they brand all of their weapons to give one special ability to its wielder, giving them an equal playing field and to know who belongs to what faction. They can be noticed often from their white and gold clothing, signs of cross shapes, and brand on their hand. That right. They're split into different hierarchies that I haven't exactly figured out yet, but obviously you have the trainees, the field agents, the hunters, the commanders, but they also have special field agents, such as some focus on banishing spirits, some focus on countering witchcraft, others focusing on the undead, etc., etc. They follow an oath of purity, which means no use of magic or fraternizing or even interacting with supernatural beings unless it's to kill them. A law of sacrifice, which will mean you protect humanity at all costs, even if it means laying down your or even a loved one's life. And a mandate of secrecy to keep all this away from the public at all costs. And that's all of our supernatural beings and the setting. I really hope you like this. Now we can finally get into the characters. Meet Rue Alistair Belladonna. Rue is meant to be a repurpose of my old survey up OC, ii.Anarchii.ii. I made ii.Anarchii, I think when I was in 7th grade. She was sweet, shy, and at some point very, very sleepy. She started off as an adopted daughter to my OC Curari, who we'll talk about later, to being the adopted little sister of Sloth from his past before he just left, to being his adopted daughter, to then being his biological daughter that he just dipped out on for some convoluted and very stupid reason. I'm still keeping the child aspect of it, but I will say that Rue does kind of take Kuro's place in the story. And I'll explain that when I get to his replacement along with Mahiru's replacement. For now, this is Rue, as I've mentioned. They're 15, non-binary, and a silly little goober. For their design, I used the aesthetics of one of their old designs and the teal color palette from their recent designs. That way they not only complement the Mahiru replacement, whose main color is still orange, but they also complement my eventual Misono replacement, since in the original AU, Aisaka and Misono were love interests, and I intend to keep it that way. I feel like breaking them up is like a cordial sin. Like, if I break them up, somebody is gonna come like smite me or something. I gave them a very squished face, and they do have fangs, but their fangs are smaller because they don't really crave human flesh and blood like other wraiths do, and that's because Rue is a wraith witch hybrid. I'll get more into that in just a bit, but back to their outfit, I noticed I wanted to keep like the pastel goth kind of feel that they had in their original design, but I feel like I kind of lost it along the way when I was designing, so I had to go back and add in some like cute little skulls just to try to tie it back. I don't think I was successful, but hey, I tried. Maybe I'll give them more pastel goth outfits in the future. I gave them the kind of cool off-white and black hair that they also had in that design to represent both of their parents. I gave them a bit of their father's eyes and a bit of their mother's, along with the face markings that their mother has. And this is where we get into their wraith and witch features, so I wanted to see if I can make at least a relatively equal amount of both of the main ones. I already mentioned their eyes, but they also have the transparent limbs, which is why they're seen wearing gloves in this picture. I made their main animal a goat, or more particularly a lamb. I don't think that's what baby goats are called, but I wanted them to be a lamb as a reference to Cult of the Lamb, my favorite video game ever. So they have the hooves, the ears, the horns, and they all have the shadowy floaty bits that they get from their wraith side coming off of them. And I forgot to mention this when I was talking about the mythological creatures, but they do have more human appearances, and you can see roos in the chibi where they have normal ears and big chunky boots. Mostly because when they're in their normal form, they're kind of floating a lot, so they feel taller than they actually are. And when they're in their normal form, they feel weird, so they wear these big platforms to kind of accommodate for the lack of height that they used to have. Onto their character though. Rue is known as the anomaly of perception. The reason they're called an anomaly is because a wraith hybrid has never been heard of, let alone a hybrid with a witch. So no one really knows what Rue would classify as. They're meant to embody balance in a sense. They're calm yet kind of chaotic, they're whimsical yet sharp, and they're constantly teetering between light and shadow. You know, all the metaphorical stuff. They have this otherworldly perspective on life, and they're always seeing something whimsical and magical in the mundane. Like, they could be staring at a crack in the sidewalk and be convinced it's a portal to another dimension, or see a gust of wind as a secret sign from the universe. But they're not, like, stupid. People tend to assume that they're stupid, but they're not. They have a very sharp intellect, and they're very smart academically and creatively. They just have a pretty unique and odd way of solving their problems. However, Rue's moral compass is kind of in the middle. They can kind of see the perspectives of all people, and they try to lean on the side of pacifism. But that can lead them to not really understanding that not everybody wants to be pacifistic. Not everyone wants to change, not everyone wants to be their friend. But they'll still try, often wanting to see the good in people. But despite their usually composed and pacifistic nature, crossing a line can lead to a rare and sharp temper, especially with their protectiveness over their loved ones. They are also very easily excited and will yap on end about things that they find even mildly interesting. Rue's abilities rely heavily on the concept of imagination and perception. Their weapon is a kind of kaleidoscope wand that reflects both light and shadow when turned. This is how they cast spells, meaning their tarot card can actually have two very different effects with two very different meanings. I imagine it can also kind of turn into weapons, kind of like the crowns do in Cult of the Lamb. However, despite this, Rue barely uses their abilities outside of little things that are mostly out of their control, like seeing ghosts, little bits of their daydreams coming to life when they disassociate, and this is because they have a limiter that was placed on them by their parents. It's not by malicious means, but more so just to make sure Rue can have as normal of a life as possible. This is also why they need to be looked after by their familiar Penny. Penny is a small spirit possessing a plush goat and was given to Rue when they were a kid. They're meant to protect Rue, and since Rue doesn't have a proper defense mechanism like Wraiths do where they can turn into a creature, they can actually hide inside of Penny and possess it instead. However, Rue's limiter actually gets broken in the beginning of the story, and they accidentally make a contract with the Mahiru replacement that I'll talk about a little later. With the limiter broken and having made contact with this person's blood, it leads to a lot of issues with all the bottled up magic and power in Rue now constantly surging through their body. At first, this starts off as something relatively minor, spits of magic coming through. My friend Robin suggested a situation where one day they're doing the dishes and the next moment they're blasting a door in. I'm thinking something like that, but more related to the abilities I already mentioned. However, this will slowly develop into something that's a lot more dire. I got the idea from an old piece of art I did of Isaka all the way back in my freshman year, but I like the idea that it's essentially their two sides of their heritage kind of trying to fight for control, as if once their magic was released, they've essentially become completely destabilized. If one side takes over, I imagine it changes their appearance slightly and their abilities will lean more towards that side, along with either a shutdown of their personality or an overdrive of it, and it's triggered by certain strong emotions. Their Wraith side is during a shutdown triggered by cold determination, fear, righteous fury, or just complete overwhelm and they need to like shut down on themselves for a second, go on autopilot a sense. They're precise, unrelenting, and embodying control and power. Meanwhile, their witch side is an overabundance of their personality. They're a little chaotic, driven by strong emotion, chaos, passion, and emotional overwhelm. They're completely unstable and wild. It's like a weird type of breakdown, if that makes sense. They've become erratic, hyper-focused, and gleefully chaotic. They're prone to laughing inappropriately, speaking in riddles, and abandoning predictable strategies in favor of being as reckless as possible. But there can also be another like way where they're just completely crying and screaming and having an entire fit because they're just that over emotional and they don't have control of their emotions in that time. And you can imagine that becomes hard for our next character because as Rue's prophet, they're tied together and they're the only ones that can be reeled in by each other. This character is the only one that can get into Rue's head. So let's get on to them. Now on to Sydney Thornfield, a 16-year-old exorcist raised in the strict militant sanctum of angels. If you can't already tell, Sydney is based on the main character in Servamp, Mahiru. And guys, listen, I may dislike Marina Dupanchang, I may hate Sofia Mendoza, but I absolutely despise Mahiru Shirota. I wish this man did not exist. He is the most boring, shallow, self-righteous, and worst of all, boring main character I have seen in any anime and manga series in my life. He's so boring and black and white. He somehow makes all the interesting characters around him just like that. And it's absolutely, it's horrendous. It's like an infection. And no one gets this worse than Kuro. No, Kuro, you can't just talk to the deranged man who was blowing up people for fun just cause Mahiru says you can. He's a 15-year-old, not Mother Teresa. Now back to Sydney before I pop a blood vessel. Since childhood, Sydney had been raised to fight the supernatural, being completely fed by her mother that monsters are the reason her father is no longer around. She sees all paranormal entities as a threat to humanity. It's not just a job for her, it's her family legacy, a path laid long before she could choose it for herself. Now, Sydney on her own is a pretty awkward yet cheery person, but she's also fiercely determined to prove herself as one of the Sanctum's greatest assets. But she also views the world in very black and white. Similarly to Rue, if not more on the extreme side, she lives in a world with no nuance. All supernatural is evil, one bad thing can make you evil, and there's no going back once you go evil. Humanity must be protected at all costs. There's no room for change. People don't change. As you can tell, she's meant to complement Rue in a way. I know this is very distinct from Mahiru's initial personality because Mahiru was like kumbaya with everybody, but you know what? I think this is more fun. She's very headstrong, disciplined, and unwavering in her beliefs. She's a major overachiever, a people pleaser, and will literally run herself ragged doing whatever people tell her to do. But she can also come off as very self-righteous and even dismissive, but her heart is firmly in the right place. Sydney genuinely wants to protect people and save lives, it's just that her rigid worldview doesn't line up with reality all the time. She struggles with the weight of expectations and living up to her family legacy, and she practically had to raise herself. But oddly, despite having to raise herself, her parents were also very overbearing at the same time, and it got even worse when her father went missing. Oh yeah, by the way, in the original story, Mahiru's mom dies. I decided to get rid of that because Servamp has an abundance of characters who just straight up have dead moms, and I truly do not understand why. But I imagine Sydney's mom is very over the top. But I don't want to remove the fact that she does love Sydney very much. But she loves her beliefs even more, unfortunately. Originally, Sydney hunted Rue on orders from her mother. And this is because when Rue and their parents moved to Echo Pines, a string of serial killings started in the town. And since the Belladonna Alisters are so odd, obviously they'd assume it's them. It's kind of like a Addams Family situation, you know, from that one movie. What's the point of being yourself when you will be like everyone else? However, when Sydney finally is able to corner Rue and is about to murder them in cold blood, the actual culprit of the murders appears, a rogue wraith, a prototype, and Rue stepped in to save Sydney's life, and in that chaotic moment, Sydney broke Rue's limiter and Rue accidentally got into contact with some of Sydney's blood, forming the contract that bounded Sydney as Rue's prophet. This turned Sydney's world upside down. I mean, now she can't go home. Forced to lie and constantly prolong her mission, claiming she's getting more information until she can figure out how to break this contract with Rue. At first, Sydney is angry and still hates Rue, despite the fact that Rue literally saved her life. Rue's more whimsical, carefree attitude often clashes with Sydney's more disciplined, no-nonsense demeanor. To Sydney, Rue is frustrating and impractical, and while Rue finds Sydney a little fascinating and sometimes really funny, they can't say that she doesn't get on their nerves. They're constantly bickering. However, over time, Rue's kindness and empathy begins to break down Sydney's walls, forcing her to see the world in shades of gray instead of black and white. And in turn, Sydney's unwavering sense of self and reality inspires Rue to stay grounded when their duality threatens to overwhelm them. I imagine it's like an enemies to friends to siblings situation. I imagine Rue's family dynamic actually really confuses Sydney at first, because like, oh wait, your parents actually spend time with you for things other than training? Your parents actually like you for real? And eventually Sydney becomes one in the family. I keep imagining this scene where they become captured and Sydney jumps in to save them. Don't touch my family type mess. Like, you get that? You get it? You see the vision? As a prophet, Sydney's abilities are designed to complement Rue's dreamlike abilities, creating a dynamic balance. This includes their judgment glyphs, the holy sigils they draw with their blood, and they can do little spells with them. They can use their weapon, which is like a whip made of light and radiant energy. It's kind of a combination of their weapon as an exorcist and the prophet's weapons. It's capable of slicing through illusions and dark magic, and due to the bond, it cannot harm Rue. And Sydney can see through deceptions and illusions, making her invaluable in unraveling the mysteries, countering Rue's reality warping powers. But along with countering the main villain of this story, wink wink, nudge nudge, I imagine their abilities develop a bit more as their bond with Rue strengthens, but this is what I got so far, and it's subject to change. Nothing in this video is fully set in stone. This is just kind of me throwing ideas out there. As mentioned before, one of Sydney's biggest roles is to help Rue regain the balance when their powers spiral out of control, drawing on their exorcist training and natural focus. Sydney uses a combination of calm authority and her bond with Rue to bring them back. However, at first this was mostly done by force, using their glyphs and feeding them her blood, but she slowly started to realize that actually made the situation worse and worse and worked less and less over time. So I imagine that Sydney learns how to get to them through their psychic connection. Sydney's steady logical thoughts cutting through Rue's emotional storms and anchoring them to reality. And you know, cute stuff like that, you know, like here comes a thought type beat. I actually might throw that actually. That sounds like a really cute idea. A big part of Sydney's journey is about unlearning prejudice and embracing nuance. Through Rue, Sydney starts to see the world as simply not good versus evil, and that maybe she doesn't need to shoulder the burden of perfection to protect those she cares about. For her design, I tried to keep a more neutral color palette, not only because Mahiru mostly has a neutral color palette, but also because I feel like Rue's design is so colorful that having them be a little less would actually make the balance better. And from there, Mahiru's color palette is the only thing I took from him, because oh my god, this man is so boring. Did I mention that before? Did I mention how boring this man was? I've shown him to my friends, like I showed him to Naomi the other day, and I'm gonna be so real, they thought he was a background character. Like, I'm so serious. This man does not have a singular core trait that helps him stand out in any capacity. Mahiru's school friend looks so much better and stands out way more, so my design was slightly inspired by him, especially with the white color palette. I gave her teal eyes and crystals to give her a pop of color and tie her to Rue. And since Mahiru apparently just wears his uniform no matter what, I don't even think he washes that thing, I wanted to give Sydney an outfit that could be used as both the uniform for the Sanctum and as a casual outfit. Though I imagine once she turns against the Sanctum, she does get an outfit change. And that's Sydney! I love her so much. She's kinda a loser. And I love the thought of these two getting on each other's nerves as a big panty and stocking situation.
You heard what I said! I'm not going anywhere with that goddamn waste of space! Who the f calling a Hey, bag! I'm so over you! Quit copying!
Now, originally this is where I would have stopped the video, but frankly, I got so obsessed with this story that I ended up making Rue's parents as well, and I really want to talk about them. Plus, I felt weird reimagining Mahiru in a video, but not reimagining Kuro, so let's get into them. Now we have Moorgan Alistair, my favorite old man! Moorgan, also known as Lucifer, Hades, or the Wraith of Entropy, is a being of profound contradiction. Once an arch-prophet and the head of the Alistair Wraith family, bound to a destructive cult, Moorgan broke free, tearing down the organization and its creator to save both the mortal and supernatural worlds along with his family. Yet even after all these years, he remains haunted by the price he had to pay for his actions. Currently, Moorgan lives a quieter life as a detective, channeling his powers of decay and chaos to solve murders and seek justice for those who's lost loved ones. It's his way of atoning for the countless of innocent lives that were caught in the crossfire of his past. But listen, he isn't just a tormented, brooding, emo, sad old man. He's also a devoted wife and... You know what? Yeah, I'm keeping that. He is a devoted male wife and a father. Back to seriousness though, as I mentioned, Moorgan is the Wraith of Entropy, entropy being decay and disorder. He's philosophical, introspective, and deeply burdened by the impertinence of everything around him. He's very quiet, cold, and calculating, but underneath is a man who feels everything too deeply. He's so baby girl. As the eldest sibling of his family, he often had to play mediator, balancing their chaos and conflicts, and now he's mourning the family he abandoned, a decision he made to protect them, but one that left him with an overwhelming sense of guilt. Moorgan's cynicism and disillusionment with existence are only tempered by the love he holds for his wife and family. Psyche, being his wife, is the only person who's able to break through his grim exterior, bringing out his warmth and even awkwardness. This man loves his wife like Odysseus loves Penelope. Y'all get ready for this section, there's gonna be a lot of epic references. This man was quite literally inspired by Odysseus. At his core, Moorgan is a family man. Despite his stoic nature, he is completely smitten with Psyche. Their bond is unshakable, and it's hilarious how shy he gets around her after nearly 40 years of marriage. When it comes to Rue, his protective instincts are really unmatched, though his decision to impose the limiter on their powers, a move Psyche didn't fully agree with, only now adds to his guilt now that Rue is struggling with their duality. And it hurts even more because at first, Rue actually tried to hide it from them. It wasn't intentional, they just didn't want to worry their parents. They know how they get about this stuff. Especially Moorgan. But now that Rue is struggling so much, that guilt has only deepened, and Moorgan is determined to help them find the balance that he never could. Moorgan is just really desperate for Rue to have the normal life that he felt was taken away from him when he became a Wraith back in 1714. Oh, I also imagine he's a bit like Dr. House in that one show, like he makes a lot of comedic and sarcastic whips. He's not all dark and brooding, okay guys? Despite all the mourning he feels, Moorgan actually doesn't care that he killed the creator or destroyed the cult. In fact, he's still happy that he did it. His journey is mostly about navigating guilt, trauma, and a constant push and pull between his destructive abilities and his desire to preserve the people he loves. As the embodiment of entropy, his powers revolve around death and disorder. I haven't exactly figured out what I wanted him to do yet though, so if you have any ideas, feel free to drop them in the comments. I mentioned this before, but Moorgan actually made the contract system. Though he didn't actually seek out his prophets, almost all of his prophets before Psyche were people that found him. Free spirits, innovators, and rebels who reject societal norms. seeing him as a liberator who tears down outdated systems, but at the same time, he attracts those who are consumed by the fear of death and decay. Individuals in positions of power desperate to preserve their youth and defy mortality. While Moorgan's allure promises the promise of freedom, it often is a double-edged sword. His followers may gain insight, but they're also led a path of inevitable self-destruction. The only one who's been able to defy this is his wife, Psyche, who is also his prophet. This is a big reason why in Moorgan's design he looks so gaunt and skinny. Moorgan loves his wife, as I mentioned, and it's because of that love that he hates feeding on his wife unless it's absolutely necessary. Immortal or not, feeding still hurts. You're still taking blood from someone. So he only feeds enough to not descend and tries to keep their contract under wraps because loopholes with Wraiths making contract with witches is a bit unheard of. Especially since the origins of witches aren't revealed outside of their covens, so to others they're just ghosts. So knowing that they have a little bit of humanity left in them that's able to create that loophole could cause a bit of a problem, if that were taken into the wrong hands. For his design, however, I mostly based it on my Kuro redesign from months back, particularly in how I drew the face. I wanted to keep his palette darker and more muted to contrast with Psyche's design, and of course, all of his little bird features, because his main animal is a raven. I gave all the darker parts of his feathers an iridescent kind of rainbow sheen to give him some color, kind of like how ravens kind of have some sort of color when they're in the sunlight. And he wears a hat in these circle sunglasses because he suffers from light sensitivity. And he also has a little butterfly in his hat to tie him to his wife because he loves her oh so much. I don't care that I've mentioned that like 50 times. This man loves his wife. He loves his wife so much. And speaking of, let's get to his wife. And finally, we have Psyche. Originally, she was just going to be named Kiana as a reference to her old names, Kirari and Kiyomi. But my friend Kyra Arts actually suggested Psyche, and I just fell in love with the name, so I just gave it to her. I feel like Psyche has the best design out of what I've made, but she was a slog. She was a slog to get through. I initially made Psyche long before I made Aisaka. She was the first servant post I ever made, and she's like old. And I mean really old, if you can't already tell. She was shipped with Kuro, of course, and I decided to bank on that and make them bonded together. Psyche, like Moorgan, is a character heavily shaped by her past, and she's desperate to find a better future for herself. Unlike Moorgan, who's more stuck in the past, Psyche tries to avoid hers as much as humanly possible and not confront it in any capacity. Psyche is from a legacy family of witches. She, her friends, and her sisters were all made to be witches in the same day, but unfortunately she was the only one who passed judgment, meaning her friends and sisters all passed away, while she was the only one left into the coven. As the heir to the coven, her expectations were abhorrently high, expected to be completely neutral at all times, and not value mortal lives as much as others. She's meant to keep balance, not fraternize with the puny mortals. A lot of witches end up losing their empathy and humanity once their turn, but Psyche kept hers. Psyche is driven by empathy, humility, and emotion, and that made her stand out, and not in a good way. The coven didn't really know what to do with her. They didn't outright reject her, both because they did care about her and because they did need her to run the coven one day. But her emotional nature made her feel like an outsider amongst her kind. For Psyche, the isolation wasn't just lonely, but it was extremely painful. The coven gave her structure and a sense of purpose, but it came at a cost of her freedom. They controlled nearly every part of her life, which is why she doesn't regret leaving, but the sense of purpose is something she's struggled to replace since that day. I imagine she's kind of like Pink Diamond. Also, I don't care what anyone says, Pink Diamond was not evil. Pink Diamond was a morally gray character, and I hate that the show stopped treating her like that. Anyway, now Psyche deals with a lot of lingering issues from her past: low self-esteem, anxiety, tendency to second-guess herself and separate herself from situations, and a pretty significant savior complex. She's so used to being told she's not doing enough or she's not doing things correctly that she overcompensates with trying to fix everyone else's problems. And deep down, she's still searching for the carefree girl she was before she was in the coven, and she projects that longing onto Rue without even realizing it. Currently, Psyche owns a small magic shop while helping her husband with his investigations. It's cozy, serene, filled with books and trinkets and enchanted remedies. She's not stupid. She's careful to not display anything overly magical. Blowing their cover would be a disaster. But everything in the shop is infused with her warmth and purpose. The shop gives her a deep sense of fulfillment, but it's also a bittersweet reminder of what she left behind. I actually imagine she met Moorgan back when he was human. She had just been turned into a witch. They had a fleeting romance that eventually had to go because people found out there was a witch in the area, and we all know what happened to witches back in the olden days. But they found each other again years later under bittersweet circumstances. Psyche is a calm and nurturing person, always trying to keep things together when everything feels like it's falling apart. Her bond with Rue is especially strong. They both have a deep connection to magic and a mutual respect for each other's talents, and Psyche acts as Rue's guide, helping them balance their emotions and powers and teaching them lessons she wished someone had taught her when she was younger. But Psyche's parenting style can be complicated. Her desperation to see Rue grow up free from secrets and external control sometimes pushes her to push her own issues onto Rue. She's so determined to help Rue avoid her mistakes that she can be a little overbearing, if not scared and avoidant. She believes Rue needs time to make mistakes and grow, but she will often blame herself if Rue gets caught up in a spiral. Anytime Rue is in a spiral, she can't help but be reminded of how Moorgan was shortly after the decimation of the cult. Those fleeting breakdowns and moments where she felt like she couldn't help him. And now she can't help her own child. So what is she worth? What is she here to do? Psyche herself is also a very emotional person, so that doesn't help her either. And she struggles to handle conflict. Psyche is meant to be a deeply flawed character, and that's what makes her so compelling to me. And I really want to write more of her in the future. I'm still trying to figure her out though. Onto her magic really quick though. Her magic focuses on light, transformation, and renewal. Her wand is adorned with iridescent crystals, a butterfly, and a protective healing spells. She uses her Starfly deck, which is a collection of enchanted tarot cards that reflect on her themes that she collected over the years herself. Essentially, she has transformation magic. Psyche's familiar is Petaluda, which is a name that Kyra also suggested. Thank you, Kyra. Petaluda is a ghostly butterfly that assists in her magic, beyond being a magical helper. Petaluda represents Psyche's own transformation. It's a comforting presence during the moments of reflection, reminding her of how far she's come. Now, her design was actually the hardest for me. Originally, I was just going to use one of her older designs, swap the colors around, and call it a day, but that really didn't work. I don't think this mysterious hot girl energy really works for who Psyche currently is. So she kind of looks like I prioritized her being hot first and being a character second, so I scrapped it and started over. Even after I did something felt off, I think the biggest issue was the lack of a cohesive theme in the color palette. I already wanted pink and purple to be the Lust duo's color, so having it on Psyche felt weird. So I needed something softer and more distinct. I wanted to get the vibe of a butterfly glowing at night, so I went with a lot of darker tones and some iridescent rainbows on her shawl. So for her final, I gave her a long butterfly themed skirt, basically a longer version of my Yasmin Bratz redesign. As mentioned, a sheer rainbow butterfly themed over sweater, bubble braids, and glasses. The glasses especially helped make her feel more motherly to me. I really love this design. It's probably my favorite out of all the ones in this video. And there you go, you have my butterfly witch, Psyche Belladonna, and that completes my old people couple. They're very special to me. I love this little family. Oh my god, they're so cute. I'm gonna be honest, this is the most fun I've had with the video since the Goof Troop, and it really showed me what was missing from the other stories I was working on. I can't wait to make more videos about these guys, and I really hope you guys like them as much as I do. The last thing I want to announce though is that I will soon be making a Patreon. It's not ready yet. I'm planning on announcing it in another video, but I wanted to have a way that you guys can support me on so that way I can start making videos a lot more and a lot more consistently, so look out for that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I know it's long. Feel free to look at my previous videos and take a look at the Goof Troop, which is my other passion project, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye!